Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast, where the art and science of operational excellence come to life through captivating stories of triumph, challenge, and transformation from the front lines of industry. Our distinguished guests, from manufacturing pioneers and medical device innovators to aerospace visionaries, diagnostic lab leaders, and major capital project leaders, unveil the hidden patterns and powerful insights that drive exceptional results in the complex world of operations. Join us on this journey of discovery as we explore the brilliant minds behind the systems that make our world work and uncover the leadership secrets that could revolutionize your approach to operations forever. This podcast is brought to you by the Operations Science Institute, the home of the science behind every operation. If you want to be a better operations or project leader, discover the principles of operations science for yourself. For a quick tour, visit the OSI Insider portal. The web address is insider.opscience.org. And be sure to check out the new book, Operations Science Applied, available on Amazon. Here is your host, Ed Pound.
Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast. Our guest today has led global procurement and supply chain operations across a wide range of industries, including pharmaceuticals, chemicals, medical devices, and beauty products. She's seen firsthand how complexity grows when every part, material, and supplier interaction carries regulatory, logistical, and financial risk. From sourcing critical chemicals under changing environmental laws to managing hundreds of SKUs across multiple ERP systems to balancing geopolitical instability effects and ethical sourcing, she's done it all. Her story is one of resilience and precision, staying composed amid global disruptions while still driving flow, efficiency, and responsible operations. Welcome to the podcast, Kate Kowalczuk.
Hello, Ed. Thank you for having me.
Oh, glad you're here. Yeah, you've got a great background, great experience. I'm sure it'll be a productive conversation. So you worked across many industries, from pharma to med device to consumer products. What are some of the biggest operational differences and similarities you've seen?
Well, the obvious similarity between med device and pharmaceutical industry is they're both regulated. So every product has to be registered with the health regulatory authorities in the country where you want to sell it, including its usage, composition, manufacturing site, etc. And it has to be registered and approved. And any changes that you would want to make to that product after registration, it would have to be resubmitted and reapproved again for this product to be continued to be sold on the market. And this presents a challenge to be able to react fast enough if you do have a supply disruption or if you have a disruption at your manufacturing site. So it's important to, I think ahead before the product is launched to build as much resilience as you can into that supply chain so you can take into consideration possible disruptions that could take, whether it be raw materials or a manufacturing site, and build those factors in the original application to have more of a secure supply chain.
I was just going to say, dealing across different countries, they don't all do it the same, right? So everyone's a different customer, I guess, for regulation.
So exactly. So it is additional challenge because different countries will have different regulations when it comes to submission and resubmission changes. Sometimes some of them are easier, some of them may be more timely. So that's also a factor that a company has to consider when they're registering the product.
So along those lines, I don't want to get you in trouble by naming a favorite country or not, but what's the range that you would see in terms of, so for a pharmaceutical product, you're making a general manufacturing change. What's the range of response times it takes to get that approved?
It depends on the level of change. There are some changes, if they are minor enough of their downstream from the final product, it could take, few weeks if you have all the right documentation in place. I think some of more major changes, if it's a major manufacturing site change or if it's a major process change, You may have to show more documentation and product equivalency studies to make sure that even with those changes, you're producing exactly the same final product.
And so at the long end, would it take a year, 2 years? How long would it take?
I would say on average, at least it could be 6 months, depending on the extent of the change. 6 months, 9 months. I would say both FDA and the European authorities have been a little quicker to respond. It also depends on the product. If the product is what's considered like life-saving and there is no other option on the market, they are usually required actually to respond within a few weeks to any change. So it depends. I'd say South Korea, I think it's one of the toughest countries so far that I've experienced in terms of requirements and any kind of changes.
So I thought about this before, but you're a good person to ask this question. We've done work with pharmaceutical companies, and part of the issue with cycle times is Operation Science says smaller batch sizes gives you smaller cycle times. Cycle time being the time through the production process until it gets into inventory. So from raw materials to inventory. And one of the pushbacks that we heard from some pharmaceutical companies, well, we can't change our batch sizes because that's a manufacturing process change, and that's just going to take forever and it'll be really expensive. I mean, is that one of those ones that would take 6 months, or if you're just changing the batch size, you're not changing the formulation? It seems like that could be pretty quick. If you have any experience with that, or what's your thought about that?
To be honest, I don't have direct experience with that, but when I used to work as a process chemist in the pharma industry, it was one like the batch. We would look what we would consider an optimal batch size. So we would take into consideration the chemistry, how well it worked on a larger scale, and really come up with the optimal size. And it was also dependent on the size of your equipment. But it is true that to be able to show equivalency, you would have to run the whole process on a smaller scale. You would have to show equivalency of the final product. And again, it depends what type of documentation you could show that would easily demonstrate it's one for one. It would depend on the ease of the change. I think that the regulatory approval timing there is not as big of a challenge as really the cost of it. Because if you think about it, you have to do a lot of experiments to really demonstrate these equivalency. And many companies, to them, it's an extra operational cost that they may not want to spend their money there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was the thing was with Operation Science, you can actually say how much you're going to reduce your inventory. And so then it's kind of a pretty clear-cut decision. Well, that's interesting. That would seem to be a barrier, and nobody really said, what the details of that were. So thanks for that. That's now I know something new. So procurement has become far more complex in recent years. What are the toughest challenges you face today? I mean, is it those regulatory challenges you've talked about when it comes to sourcing and supply chain continuity, or is it something else?
So I would say in the last decade, there were 3 challenges that I observed in general that not only impact pharmaceutical companies, but also personal care, chemical industries, and really any other industry that uses basic chemicals then to apply with the products that they manufacture. So the first challenge is that there have been significant consolidation in manufacturers of the very basic chemicals. So the ones that come from natural gas and oil. And so you have a lot less manufacturing sites for these materials. And you can think of these materials, it's almost like a feedstock that goes into more complex materials that are used across many different industries. So now the funnel has gotten smaller. And one good example of the level of disruption is, I'm not sure if you remember, in the winter of 2021, they had these freezing winter storms that came through Texas, where the temperature got really low.
Yeah, power grid went out. Yeah.
And these storms, they took out essentially all the chemical manufacturers online, because in Texas, a lot of manufacturing is done in the open air because normally the climate will allow it. But with those freezing temperatures, the pipes froze, they bursted, the tanks cracked. So it disrupted production all across. And that little manufacturing space in Texas makes up 25% of our global capacity for those basic chemicals.
Global capacity, not just the US.
Yes, global capacity, that one little space. So then it created essentially a global chaos because everybody else was fighting for the rest of that 75% capacity between Asia, Europe, South America. So it's a perfect example how to show that the funnel got smaller and things got a little bit more difficult. I would say the second challenge I've seen is product supply consolidation with some of the major chemical companies. So companies like BASF, Dow Chemical, they have designated products that they will manufacture in America for America, in Europe for Europe, in Asia for Asia, to streamline and simplify their own supply chain. However, if you're a global manufacturer with like one global formula, you may not be able to find all the raw materials that you want in one particular region. You may have to source it either through distribution or even through like your internal company transactions from another region. So that, of course, adds complexity to your supply chain, and it also adds additional constraint on your internal resources, because now they have to worry about internally doing product transfers for manufacturing. And the third challenge that I've seen is general product discontinuations. So I've seen that suppliers are much quicker to discontinue either low volume, low selling products, just to focus on the ones that are most profitable and they're selling the most to optimize their operations. But of course, that presents a challenge for everybody else to look for alternatives, which now it seems like we're doing a lot more frequently than before.
Okay, so that's interesting. And it sounds like a lot of that in operation science terms is people are trying to reduce variability, which of course drives all sorts of requirements. And so you could see it's a rational decision, but of course it can make things a little bit more difficult. I'm slow, but I can't be trained. I was wondering about that second one where you're saying where companies produce a certain product and for a certain region. So if I have product A in the United States and I have product A in Europe, are you saying that you can't get enough of product A in Europe, so you have to get it from the United States? Or is it they just don't make product A in the United States and you're in Europe? Would you clarify that for me a little bit?
It's the second scenario. So let's say, for example, if you're buying certain surfactant from BASF and they only make that particular surfactant in America, but you also have a manufacturing site in Europe that needs that surfactant. You will not be able to buy that same exact surfactant in Europe. Now, a lot of times they do claim that these products are one-for-one substitutions. But in my personal experience, I have not found that to be always the case, that sometimes there are variations, and particularly in materials like surfactants, polymers, silicones that are much more complex and they're mixtures of a lot of other chemicals. The level of composition and even like the impurity profiles can impact the final formulations of your products. So they're always not one for one. And so in this case, if you really want that same surfactant, you have to find a way to bring it from US. And sometimes you are able to do it through designated distributors. But in some cases, you have to manage it yourself through internal transfer. So like your team in US would purchase the surfactant in US and then transfer it to Europe for production.
Okay, great. Yeah, I got that now. All right, thanks. Let's switch a little bit and talk about systems. I know you have a lot of experience with different systems. Describe the best practices in terms of ERP systems, because, there are all kinds of different types out there. What works well in terms of supporting supply chain performance, and where do you run into problems?
So in my career, I've worked with SAP, JD Edwards, NetSuite, and D365. Um, and each of these systems, I think they do the job that they're designed to, meaning they will take the sales orders and they will translate them into production orders. And then they will take the production plan and they will translate it into a purchasing plan, what needs to be purchased at what time. Now, some of them have more advanced features like SAP. I think SAP is better designed for larger manufacturers with more complex product mix. And they do have more, I would say, powerful features when it comes to reporting. So you can extract a lot more information easier from the system than as opposed to D365 or NetSuite. However, really the key for any ERP system is adaptation and data maintenance. So if a company adopts an ERP system, there has to be agreement from all the functions that they will be using it and they will be using it properly. Meaning customer service will be putting all the sales orders into the system. They will be maintaining the dates, maintaining the product lead times. Production will plan all their orders in the system, which then will be translating everything that purchasing needs to do. And, maintaining the dates, maintaining the accurate data, and maintaining the right setup. So the BOMs, bills of material, have to be set up correctly. The product life cycle, how long it takes to produce it, that has to be set up correctly. And if you have all those things in place, any of those systems will do what 90% of what it's supposed to do to help a company operate.
Yeah, that's making sure that the data integrity is there. And I want to come back to that question, but I just had a podcast. I think it was one before this most recent one, was Marta Rodriguez, and she does sort of the same thing. And we had this discussion about customization because, SAP or Oracle or whoever will come in and they have, the way their system is set up. And then a company has a way that it's been running its business on whatever patchwork of systems it has. What's your view on customization of the system versus adopting the company practices to work for SAP, or for instance, or Oracle or D365?
Ideally, I would say it would be a preference to adapt to the system. However, it is difficult nowadays to do that because certain companies, before they implement any kind of system, they had a way of operating in certain ways. They have certain procedures, certain setups that it would be difficult just to change it completely, just to adapt to an ERP. But the challenge when you start doing customization is, first of all, is cost, and then there is maintenance. So if you customize a product, then you will pay premium for maintenance of that customization. And that's something to consider. And now you can always balance it. You can, look at an ERP system and really determine maybe only few aspects of it need to be customized to fit the business better. And that can be, a solution that you can compromise on.
Right. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're going to have some customization, most likely. And I think everybody would agree minimum customization is better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So coming back to data integrity, as you mentioned, all these things have to happen and the system will work right. But in your experience, how often does that happen well? And how do you make sure that people maintain the data integrity and follow the practices that they're supposed to practice?
So very good question. And honestly, I've experienced in essentially all my roles, I experienced the fact that data is not well maintained in the systems. And that generates a lot of problems because essentially, there's a saying, garbage in, garbage out. Not going to get actual data to be able to make the right decisions if that data is flawed in a certain way. So one way to try to enforce it, you can have processes in place that everyone has to follow. But one thing that I found with processes, some people will follow them to a T. Some people will decide to follow only part of them or maybe some of the time. And a lot of times you will not find these gaps with data until there is a problem or there is an audit where they discovered that the process has not been followed thoroughly by everyone. I found the best way to kind of enforce the data integrity with everyone who's using the system is really through KPI, where every individual who works in the system has a KPI designated for maintaining the correct dates, maintaining the right cycle times, maintaining the correct product information. And they are measured against that KPI throughout the year, and it's part of their merit increase. It's part of their performance. I think these methods, resonate a little bit better with people because essentially then you are holding them accountable to do this on a regular basis. But to be honest, what I've experienced in most organizations, it's not really as enforced as it should be.
Right. Yeah, I've seen so many places where, they feel like they have to get a new ERP system because things are just out of control. And then when you look at what people are doing, they're just using the ERP system kind of to report financial transactions, and they kind of just manage however they want to manage. And so it becomes a little bit of the Wild West. It's a common problem, definitely. I think actually your recommendation is perfect. I mean, people just have to be measured on how well they follow the process rather than just on their results, because not following the process, while they might get good results, can result in all sorts of problems for people elsewhere. So yeah, that is a challenge. So along those lines, in your view, what separates good planners and procurement professionals from great ones?
To me, a great planner should be very knowledgeable in the production lines for which they're planning. And they don't have to be an expert in terms of how machines operate. However, they need to understand, how many products are produced on that line. What is the output per shift, per hour? What is the staffing situation? How many operators do you need at any one time? Do these operators require any special training to operate the machines? Or even if it's a manual line, do they need special training if they haven't worked on that line before? How many shifts normally the plant operates on? Because all those factors essentially are important to execute a reasonable production plan that then can be executed by manufacturing. Otherwise, you may have too many orders or not enough orders scheduled for one line, and of course you lose productivity. For the buyers, I think it's also important that they understand how the parts or services that are purchasing are impacting the final product. Now, again, they don't necessarily have to be experts, particularly when it comes, to materials that we would buy in pharmaceutical industry, more complex materials. But they have to have some understanding whether the material is custom made for the company, or is it something more of a commodity that can be easily bought. They need to understand the supplier landscape. Do we have a lot of suppliers that we can buy from? Do we only have a few? What's my negotiating power with these suppliers? Pay attention to the cost and how can we be most effective to buy the material to get the most for our money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. Understanding the lay of the land is important. I remember early in my career, we consolidated a supply base This was with Allied Signal, which is now Honeywell, from like 5,000 suppliers to, I don't know, 500 or 600. What they would say is we would go to the suppliers and say, oh, we'll give you all this additional business because we're consolidating and you need to give us cost reductions and we'll work with you on process improvement. And then they got to the ball bearing manufacturers. And this was for aerospace jet engines where you use a couple of hundred bearings. They're very expensive in a year, but you know, you can go to a bearing supplier and say, yeah, look, Mac, we make 100,000 of these a year for the automobile suppliers. You need to get in line. So, you know, not a whole lot of leverage there. Along those lines, so one of the things we did, though, was we set up a program where we're actually going to suppliers and working with them on process improvement. And I'm not sure how that works. I mean, if you're buying raw materials that are commodities, I don't know if there's that much of an opportunity, might be, but do you find that these outreach programs, cooperative efforts with suppliers can be productive? What's your experience with that?
The most experience with that I had was really in the pharma industry, because essentially we would be outsourcing like one process where we would actually have a technical package that supplier would follow. However, it would be our expectation that when the supplier became familiar with that tech package, they would be looking for opportunities to make process improvements, maybe make the process a little greener or a little faster, or maybe improve the impurity profile. But there were challenges also with this, because we always wanted to make sure that regardless what changes they made to their process or any process improvements, the final product, if it was registered as part of the final drug, it had to be exactly the same. So it wasn't something that was as commonly used as maybe it should, because there was always that concern that they will make certain changes, but then in the end, we may get something different that may affect our registration. Yeah, I haven't experienced that as much in personal care or med device. I'm not sure if really companies are leveraging the suppliers enough to have those joint improvement processes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's an untapped resource. I mean, again, it depends on the context, but we had great success with that. And you know, suppliers were surprised. They're like, oh, wait, you mean you want to work together? You're just not going to give me an order. So yeah, it's definitely an opportunity. Okay, so let's talk about next, what's out on the horizon in terms of opportunities for improvement, which of course brings up the topic of AI. But AI, what else do you see in terms of changes to supply chain management out there in the near future that's going to have significant impact?
I've seen one system, Kinaxis, that's been, I think, gaining popularity, and they have different types of solutions, but one important one is they are able to connect more data within supply chain. So they could tie in logistics data, logistics information on shipments going in and out, for example, to warehouses or to distribution centers, as well as be able to kind of give visibility on that spend to manage it. And then also connecting shipments to production facilities to be able to know really when materials are arriving, to really have like a full picture. Like you could have a snapshot on daily basis, exactly what's going on where, what's moving where. And I think that type of visibility is important, because it enables to identify any gaps. So if you have, for example, major delays all the time in certain shipments, or if your inventory levels are not aligned in, for example, what you have in the system versus in the warehouse, it gives more visibility, and I think it will help businesses make better decisions and fix those gaps if they need to. In terms of AI, I had opportunity to attend a couple different workshops with different companies offering various solutions. What I mainly seen is what AI is good as, reading documents, reading emails, reading invoices, and being able to summarize the context of it, form any communication. There was one company that claimed to have a full purchasing AI agent, where they were able to create an RFQ, send it to suppliers, analyze the results, negotiate a contract or negotiate a PO, essentially send out PO, full end-to-end service. And I didn't have a chance to really examine it in more detail, but I have to tell you that I am a little skeptical of like being able to negotiate contract piece, because negotiations is very much, I think, human interaction. It's asking the right questions to the other side to really find out what is their best scenario for the deal, to be able to come to the middle where, let's say, each party, can say it's a win-win situation. But where I would think AI could be useful is, as we talked earlier, actually helping with the data integrity maintenance. So AI agent as part of an ERP system that, for example, maybe looks at any gaps in data or any issues with data. If you have orders in the past, they can flag it either to customer service or to a buyer saying, need to fix those dates. And if the buyer can, let's say, tell the agent, okay, extend them by a week, they do it. And I think that would really help productivity overall. But I have not seen a solution yet.
Yeah. So are you actively engaged in bringing in AI solutions or doing pilots? Are you working on that now?
Within my current employer, we've been doing work with Copilot. At this point, we're not considering other options. I think in regulated industries, I would say there's a little bit of a hesitation in using AI.
Yeah, there should be, yeah.
Because you have to make sure you use it responsibly and you're not relying on it to maybe interpret certain data that really should be reviewed by human to be able to make the right conclusions.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the general consensus. As I've said before, I love AI. I use AI. I don't trust AI. So, particularly when you're doing things that require regulation and require setting monetary values, be very cautious. All right, so let's switch a little bit and talk about Kate, the woman. I know we've talked before, and I think you grew up in Poland, right? And you wouldn't have had the typical childhood experiences somebody growing up in the U.S. had. What were your early influences in your childhood that led you to where you were today? You have brothers and sisters. How did that evolve?
Yeah, I have one younger sister, yes. And when I grew up in Poland, it was still under the Iron Curtain. So it was a very different environment from US. There was not a lot of personal freedom. There were a lot of shortages of, basic needs like food, clothing, personal care items.
Yeah, that's pretty basic. Yeah.
For a while, actually, we had like food rations. So each family was allowed to buy only certain amount of certain goods per month, depending on the family size. And of course, there was approach to reuse, recycle, because you couldn't get anything new. So if the machine broke, you had to fix it. Otherwise, you couldn't get a new one. But I think it really taught me to become a minimalist, like in my personal life, and even in professional life. And I really realized that even though I didn't grow up with much, my childhood really wasn't bad, and you really don't need that many material things to, I guess, find true happiness or satisfaction in life. But to some extent, it translated into my professional experience that I look for simple solutions. And even like we're talking about ERP system, you don't need an ERP system with a lot of bells and whistles. If you use a standard one, but you use it correctly, it can really be effective. And I would say the aspect of reuse, recycle really made me passionate about sustainability. In one of my roles, I was able to be part of a sustainability council where we were actually building sustainability plan for the company, looking to set up our scope 1, scope 2 targets, looking for renewable sources of energy. And even within supply chain, I was able to put in certain recycle programs for some of our packaging. And I found that very rewarding. And it's important that we focus on it, especially now. Because I have to tell you, Ed, I really struggle with the Western over-consumerism. I think that our planet is in the shape that it is right now because, we got to the point where we think we need so many things where in reality we don't.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
But I think sustainability is a main driving factor for companies for the future as well, and future of supply chain. If you can build in resilience to, let's say, if you recycle packaging, you don't need to buy as much. You're not going to be as impacted by any disruptions in the market. Same thing even with energy sources. If you're on electricity grid and the grid goes down, you're reliant on it to come back. But if you have your own renewable energy source, you're free to continue your business. And I think those are some things important to consider, I think, for future of all companies.
Yeah, I bet that translates into sort of your attitude towards work. I see you having a pretty calm demeanor and not getting really too upset about, the supplier was late this one time, we got to go destroy the supplier. You translate that in terms of how you convey expectations to people at work. Yeah, that's awesome. Were you there? Were you there when the I guess that was 1989 when the Iron Curtain fell, the Berlin Wall fell?
Yes, we left not too long after that.
Wow. Yeah, that was awesome. I was living in Japan at the time and just being stunned at that development. That was amazing.
There was part of me that really didn't believe it was happening because there was really a time in Poland where there was not a lot of optimism for the future. But once the wall came down, I think it rejuvenated the spirit to drive the change.
Yeah, definitely. Poland now seems like a pretty dynamic country with a lot going on. I mean, that's a massive turnaround.
Yes, absolutely.
So you've lived and worked in several countries, proficient in 6 languages. How has that experiences, other than what we've talked about, kind of shaped how you think about leadership and operations?
Well, I think it is important to be able to adapt to different cultures in terms of mannerism, communication, because it does make a difference with people. I mean, especially if you have a global team, if you give the same direction to each of your members, they all may interpret it differently based on like their own culture and how they communicate. I think with language, sometimes I found it helps to build relationships with people. Because I think there is something to be said to be able to have a conversation with someone in their native language where they're not struggling for words or phrases to express in English. There's that comfort zone. And I think it helped me build relationships with colleagues, but also with suppliers to connect with them a little bit differently outside of the business in a sense. So I've always found that helpful.
Yeah, I could see that would be invaluable, definitely, particularly when you're working, with a company that has a supply base that's international. So last question, what do you do outside of work to bring yourself joy or to stop thinking about work? Or you jog or sports or theater or
Yeah, I'm very much an outdoor person. So whatever I can do outside, I enjoy it if it's just walking or hiking or even swimming at the pool in the summer. But I actually also enjoy sewing as a hobby. And actually, I've been engaging with some local efforts in textile recycling, reuse, repair. And I find joy in that because I like to sew. And if I can help people repair so they can reuse, especially textiles are a huge contributor to our global waste. I feel good that I can make a very small part. It's a very small part of it.
Well, that's fantastic. Fascinating conversation. Great advice for people who manage supply chains. Really appreciate you being on the podcast. Let's make sure we keep in touch.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate you having me here.
It was a pleasure. Take care, Kate.
Thank you.
The Operations Science podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. Join the Operations Science Institute at opscience.org. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not represent their company's views unless specifically stated as such.